Hello, my name's Dunfield. I'm the pastor of the Baptist Church here in St. Andrews, New Brunswick, and I'd like to welcome you to our program. Here's a question for you, and it's a question a lot of people ask. Does God have favorites? Well, for a lot of people it seems He does. Why is it that two people will pray over a situation and one person will get well and one person won't get well, or anything along that line? And so people begin to think sometimes that God has favorites, someone that He shows favor to. And He shows favor over one person more than He shows favor over another. And then we begin to become angry and upset over that, and we go, that's not fair, that's not right, that God would choose someone over someone else. Let me give you an example of God showing favor. It's found in Luke chapter 1, verse 25 and 28. And in this Christmas season, it's a text that some of you may have heard before or heard about at Christmas. But it's an interesting text, and it reads this way. In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, now Elizabeth was the mother of John the Baptist, who was a cousin to Jesus. So anyway, and this is how they're finding the timeline for what they're going to be saying here. In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town of Galilee, and to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. And the virgin's name was Mary. And you all know the Christmas story of the angel coming to Mary. We talked about it last week on this program. And the angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored, the Lord is with you." And so here right off, you have, right at the very beginning of the Gospel of Luke, the first chapter, God having a favor. In fact, He says, you are highly favored. Not only are you favored, but you are highly favored. In the book of Genesis, we find the same term found in chapter 18, verse 3, and there we hear these words, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by." And later in Genesis 33, verse 10, we read this, and this is about Jacob. "No, please," said Jacob, "if I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably." And also in the Old Testament, you've got the story of Ruth, the story of Hannah, the story of Esther, and all of them say that they have found favor with God. So obviously, if we take these stories seriously, God has favorites. Hannah was a favorite. Mary was a favorite. Jacob was a favorite. You look at them one after another. Esther, another favorite. So what does He mean by that? If you have a favorite, does it mean other favorites you can't have? Let me give you an example of what I'm trying to say here. I have a favorite food. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, I love Mexican food. I could eat Mexican food all the time, different kinds of it. I used to live in California, and it was daily that we would eat Mexican food in California. But I have another favorite, and that favorite is lasagna. I love eggplant parmesan. I love a lot of foods that are Italian. Spaghetti and meatballs, I just love those. And different kinds of sauces, tomato sauces, they're also my favorite. My son cooks a dish that is sweet potato, fish with a crust on it. It is out of this world. And I would say that's one of my favorites. My mom's homemade biscuits. Those things, I would walk 10 miles to eat Mom's biscuits with fresh strawberry preserves on them. A favorite. You kind of get what I'm saying here. Because you have something that's your favorite doesn't mean that you can't have other favorites. And because God says that Mary is highly favored, Hannah is favored, you go through all of the other people I mentioned, like Ruth and Esther and Elizabeth and all these people favored by God, Jacob, doesn't mean that other people are not favored as well. Now, I'm going to ask you a second question. What do you think all these people have in common that they are favored? And the answer comes back, every one of these people mentioned in Scripture that are favored are believers in God. So, the Scripture, instead of saying that God has a favorite this person and not that person, say you have two Christians sitting in a room and God saying, well, I like you more than you. No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying highly favored are those people who are believers. That's what they have in common, that they believed. Mary believed. And because she believed, she was highly favored. Hannah believed. Sarah believed. You have Esther who believed. All of them had this thing in common. They all were believers. So, the next question I'm going to ask you, and this is the third question, does God have favorites? Yes. And does that mean that he only has one favorite? No. Anybody who is a believer is a favorite of God. And what does it mean to have favor? What does that mean, to have favor or to be God's favorite? In Luke chapter 1, verse 30, I'll read this text again. But the angel said to her, do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. So there it is again. So those who believe are all part of God's favorite. Now here's an interesting thing. This word favorite, it's the only place that a Greek word that we sometimes call charisma or charis, meaning grace, is used in the New Testament. The rest of the time, and it's over 150 times, whenever that word charis is translated from Greek, it is translated as grace. And so you could read very easily, and let me go back and read chapter 1 of Luke, verse 30 again. Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found grace before God. And you go back to Genesis 33, and I'll read again. If I have found favor, but we could read it, if I have found grace in your eyes, accept this gift from me. And if we go back to Luke, chapter 1, verse 25 through 28, in verse 28, the angel went to her and said, greetings, you are highly favored. He could have said, greetings, you have received grace. And so those people that are highly favored or favored by God are people who have received God's grace. And they receive God's grace by believing. So if you are a believer and you believe in God, doesn't matter what denomination, doesn't matter where you are in your Christian journey or spiritual journey, you have found favor with God. If you believe, you have found grace. And that grace is to be highly favored by God. Let me read you a text from the book of Ephesians, kind of show you what I'm talking about. It's found in chapter 2, verse 8. Now here's how you find favor and grace with God, okay? For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourselves, it is a gift of God. So there's the word that's translated highly favored, and here it's translated as grace. For it is by grace you have been saved, or the fact that you have been highly favored by God. And how do you become favored by God? Through faith. And that faith is not of yourselves, it is from God. I just want to end this by saying something that is really, really important about this. A lot of people struggle with their spiritual relationship because they think they're not good enough. They can't live up to the standards that God has. They think that if they are a follower of God or a person of faith, then there's a ton of things they have to do. They have to stop doing this and stop doing that, and they have to believe this, and they have to go to church 800 times a week, and they have to give all their money to God, and they have to stop seeing their friends, and they have to, I don't know, the list just goes on and on and on. But that's not what it says, does it? It says Mary was highly favored or received grace. Why? Because she believed. And she believed that by faith, belief for faith. She trusted God. So during this Christmas season, I don't know what's going on in your life, but I know for a lot of people it's a very sad time of season, this season. People are alone. COVID hasn't made it easier. People can't get together like we used to. We always had a large group of people in for Christmas dinner, not really able to do that this year as much. And what happens is people start to feel isolated and alone. And people begin to feel like, wow, I'm isolated, I'm alone, and I'm really not living up to all these tremendous standards that Christianity has laid before me. And therefore, I'm not really liked by God. Have people that they come into church and they joke and they go, oh, the ceiling's going to fall on me. But the reality is this. The people who are highly favored or receive God's grace are simply those people that put their trust in God. They say, hey, I believe. I believe. And so your relationship with the God of the universe isn't based upon how much you do, how much you work, how much you give, how often you go to church, how deep your roots are. What it is, it's based upon your relationship. Do you believe? Do you trust? Do you say to God, hey, here I am. I don't understand it all. I don't understand what's going on in my life all the time, and I don't understand why some of these bad things happen to me. I don't understand why things work the way they are. But I know that I'm highly favored if I believe. And so my pledge to you, my plea to you tonight, is to think about that. All it takes is saying, hey, I'm willing to give it a shot. I'm willing to think about it. And I can't ask any more of that from you. Anyway, my name's Lad Dunfield. I'm the pastor of the St. Andrew's Baptist Church in St. Andrews, New Brunswick. And I have just one little commercial at the end. Christmas Eve service at our church is at 6:30 to 7:30. And if you would like to attend here in St. Andrews, please get in touch with me. Almost all the seats are taken. But we'd like to give you an opportunity to come and worship with us. So thank you very much, and see you next week.